There is a war being waged, not on a battlefield, but within the soul. It is not declared with weapons, but with subtle words, shifting glances, and invisible strings of control. Emotional manipulation is one of the most dangerous assaults on the psyche, because it hides behind masks of affection, duty, or charm. And before you even realize it, your thoughts are no longer your own. The truth is simple: you must learn to see what was designed to remain hidden, and in doing so, you reclaim your sovereignty, not just over your mind, but over your life. Let us begin the journey inward. The first defense against manipulation is self-awareness. If a person is unaware of their emotional landscape, if they do not know their own wounds, desires, insecurities, or patterns, they become highly vulnerable to others who do. Emotional manipulators are not random attackers. They are precise readers of weakness. They may not even be conscious of what they are doing, but their instincts guide them toward those whose inner world is not anchored. When your sense of identity is vague or built upon the opinions of others, you become like a mirror reflecting whatever is shown to you. This is dangerous because it means your emotional responses can be easily directed, like water finding the easiest path through a crack in the wall. Self-awareness is the act of stepping back from the automatic responses that define most people's lives. It is the willingness to observe your emotional triggers without reacting to them, to name them without shame, and to trace their roots without fear. Many people avoid this kind of self-inquiry because it is uncomfortable. It reveals how much of our behavior has been shaped by old pain, forgotten memories, or unconscious beliefs inherited from childhood. But without facing these inner forces, you are not truly free. You are simply moving through life in a state of reaction rather than creation. When a manipulator enters your life, they are not just exploiting what's wrong with them. They are capitalizing on what is unresolved within you. If someone can make you feel guilty for saying no, that guilt didn't begin with them. It began long ago, perhaps when you were punished for asserting your needs, or praised only when you were compliant. If someone can make you doubt your memory, your truth, or your perception of reality, the soil for that doubt was prepared through a life of guessing your instincts or suppressing your voice. This is why true protection from manipulation does not begin with confrontation or distance. It begins with introspection. Who are you beneath the roles you play? Where did you first learn to abandon your own needs in exchange for love or safety? What emotional contracts are you still carrying? Contracts that you never signed, but were conditioned to uphold. To know the terrain of your psyche is to create inner clarity, and clarity is the ultimate form of power. When you know what you value, no one can sell you their confusion. When you understand your triggers, no one can provoke you into handing over your peace. When you see your own patterns, you stop repeating them under new disguises. The manipulator wants you to be emotionally fogged, to live in reaction, to chase approval, to doubt yourself, and to seek validation from the very person who is undermining your reality. But when you are grounded in self-awareness, you no longer seek external permission to feel what you feel or know what you know. Your boundaries are not defensive walls. They are the natural result of deep self-respect. You no longer need to explain yourself to be understood, nor do you tolerate being reduced to a version of yourself that exists only to serve someone else's ego or insecurity. Emotional manipulation only thrives where there is emotional vacancy. The more you fill that space with presence, truth, and self-recognition, the less room there is for distortion. This is not an overnight journey. It is a daily return to yourself. It requires patience, reflection, and the courage to face the parts of yourself you once disowned. But in doing so, you build an inner architecture that is not easily shaken. You begin to live from within rather than from the outer weather of other people's moods, tactics, or games. You become rooted. You become clear, and most importantly, you become unshakable in your knowing of who you are and what you will no longer allow. Emotional manipulators do not reveal themselves in obvious ways. They wear masks crafted from charm, sympathy, intelligence, or even love. These masks are not random. They are carefully designed to appeal to your deepest needs and emotional blind spots. The manipulator rarely begins with overt control. They start with subtle influence. They play the role that you most desire or fear, because once they enter your emotional radar as a helper, victim, or romantic ideal, your defenses naturally lower. You begin to trust their intentions, not because they have earned it, but because they are mirroring something within you. Your longing to be needed, loved, admired, or rescued. This is how manipulation bypasses logic and speaks directly to the unconscious. What makes it even more dangerous is that it often feels like connection, like intimacy, like fate. But what you're feeling is not love or trust. It's entanglement disguised as care. The emotional manipulator doesn't use direct commands. They use indirect pressures. They rarely say, "You must do this," but their silence, sighs, or expressions of disappointment are engineered to trigger your internal guilt. They communicate through energy rather than language. You might notice the way they shift blame without ever naming it, how they make you feel responsible for their mood without saying a word, how they twist conversations just enough to make you question what actually happened. These are not accidental behaviors. They are deliberate distortions of emotional reality designed to keep you unstable and unsure of yourself. The more confused you feel, the more control they have. The moment you start wondering, maybe I am overreacting, or maybe it is my fault, they have already succeeded in implanting doubt. And when doubt becomes your dominant inner voice, their narrative becomes your truth. This is why it's crucial to learn how to read not just words, but patterns. Emotional manipulators will often display a strange contradiction between what they say and how they act. They may tell you they care about your well-being, but they repeatedly ignore your boundaries. They may insist that you're the most important person in their life, yet make you feel small, guilty, or unstable when you express your needs. The words and the energy do not align, and that dissonance is the signal. Most people overlook it because they are listening to the surface while ignoring their deeper felt sense. You feel tension in your body, you sense something is off, but you override it to maintain harmony or avoid conflict. This is where the manipulator thrives, in the space where your intuition whispers, but you silence it in the name of peace. The mask the manipulator wears is only effective when you doubt your own vision. If you've been conditioned to prioritize the emotions of others over your own clarity, you will rationalize their behavior until your inner world becomes a distorted mirror of their intentions. You'll find yourself justifying cruelty as care, excusing control as concern, and blaming yourself for their emotional instability. And yet somewhere deep within, a quiet voice persists. That voice is your truth, and it cannot be erased. It can only be ignored. But every time you ignore it, you lose a part of your authority over your own life. Eventually, you forget what your truth even sounds like. You become so used to accommodating their emotional storms that you mistake chaos for connection, drama for passion, silence for safety. The true power lies in becoming fluent in your own emotional language, so that no one else can translate your experience for you. You must start observing the contrast between what people say and how they make you feel. You must recognize that masks, no matter how beautiful, are still disguises, and once you can see through them, you are no longer bound by the illusion they project. The manipulator can only maintain control as long as you accept the role they cast you in. The moment you begin to question that role, to name the distortion, to honor what your body is telling you even when your mind is confused, you take back the pen and begin writing your own narrative again. There is a structure to emotional manipulation, a predictable cycle that reveals itself when you begin to pay attention not to isolated incidents but to repeated patterns of behavior. These mind games are not random acts of emotional chaos. They follow an internal logic that is meant to destabilize your perception of reality and weaken your sense of self. The manipulator's goal is simple: to gain control without appearing to demand it. They want you to surrender your will willingly, to question your intuition without being told directly, to feel responsible for the emotional climate of a relationship that they alone are shaping behind the scenes. One of the most insidious techniques they use is gaslighting, where they systematically deny your experience, twist your words, or challenge your memory until you begin to lose confidence in your own judgment. They may say things like "you're too sensitive," or "that never happened," or "you're imagining things," until you start wondering whether your emotional responses are valid at all. This erosion of certainty happens slowly, like water wearing down stone, until what once felt solid inside you begins to feel vague, unstable, and wrong. Gaslighting doesn't require shouting or confrontation. It works best in quiet, everyday exchanges. A sigh when you speak your truth, a smirk when you express discomfort, a calm dismissal when you bring up something that hurt you. These are not accidents. They are calculated moves designed to reframe reality in their favor. Over time, you find yourself shrinking in conversations, over-explaining your feelings, apologizing for things that are not your fault, and doubting your instincts even when they scream at you. You become hypervigilant, walking on emotional eggshells, trying to anticipate their reaction, constantly wondering if you're too much or not enough. In this fragile emotional state, the manipulator becomes the one person who seems to hold the map to clarity, so you keep going back to them for reassurance, for validation, for understanding. This is the emotional trap. They create the confusion and then position themselves as the solution to it, making you more dependent on their perspective while further disconnecting you from your own. Another common mind game is guilt tripping, where your natural empathy is used against you. Manipulators understand that caring individuals are particularly vulnerable to shame. They don't need to demand obedience. They just have to make you feel like you're letting them down, like you're being selfish, cold, or uncaring when you prioritize yourself. They phrase things in ways that make your healthy boundaries sound like betrayals, your no sound like rejection, and your needs seem like burdens. And because you don't want to be the villain, you begin to sacrifice little parts of yourself to maintain the illusion of peace. You give more, accommodate more, explain more, and every time you do, you lose a little more of your voice. There's also the tactic of the silent treatment, not as a space for reflection, but as a tool of punishment. When you speak a truth they don't like, or when you assert your autonomy, they withdraw emotionally or physically without explanation. The silence is not absence, it's a message. It says, "You've disappointed me, you've broken the unspoken rules. I will withhold connection until you return to the role I need you to play." This form of abandonment conditions you to associate honesty with rejection, so you begin to silence yourself before they ever have to. Over time, your emotional world becomes built around their moods and their approval, and you start living in reaction to them instead of alignment with yourself. And then there is the cycle of love, bombing, and devaluation. In the beginning, they overwhelm you with affection, attention, and praise. They create the illusion of perfect connection, only to later withdraw it suddenly, leaving you wondering what you did wrong. This shift is intentional. It keeps you chasing the original high, hoping you can earn back their affection if you just try harder. This cycle of reward and punishment is not love. It is conditioning. It's a psychological game designed to make you associate inconsistency with intensity and chaos with connection. When you understand these tactics not as isolated behaviors, but as a coordinated pattern of control, you stop taking the confusion personally. You stop blaming yourself for the instability, and you begin to see the design beneath the disorder. And once you see it, you can no longer be controlled by it. A boundary is not simply a rule you set with others. It is a declaration of how deeply you have come to respect yourself. Emotional manipulators are not just testing your patience. They are testing the structure of your inner world. They push not because they are strong, but because they sense weakness in your stance. If your boundaries are built on fear, guilt, or the hope of being liked, they will be easily bent, twisted, or shattered. True boundaries are not loud, nor are they defensive or angry. They are calm, firm, and rooted in clarity. They do not require explanation or permission. They arise naturally from a person who has come to value their peace more than their approval rating. When you understand this, you begin to see that protecting your emotional space is not an act of cruelty, but of wisdom. It is not a rejection of others, but a profound act of self-honoring. Setting boundaries requires that you first recognize where you have been abandoning yourself. It is not about simply saying no. It is about understanding why you said yes when you didn't want to. It is about noticing when you betray your own needs to maintain an illusion of harmony. Emotional manipulators exploit the parts of you that are still seeking external validation. They know how to phrase things in a way that makes you feel selfish for prioritizing yourself. They frame your detachment as disloyalty, your truth as disrespect, and your distance as punishment. But the reality is, the moment you begin to assert your space, they lose access to the levers they once pulled to control your reactions. What they call defiance is actually you reclaiming your autonomy. What they call emotional unavailability is you no longer leaking your energy into a bottomless pit of demands, guilt, and confusion. The strength of a boundary is not measured in how loudly you declare it, but in how consistently you enforce it. Manipulators will always test the edges. They may respond with anger, tears, silence, or even charm, but their aim is always the same: to return to the position of influence they once held over your emotions. This is why it is essential to hold the boundary, especially when it is challenged. If you set a limit and then bend it under pressure, you teach them that your truth is negotiable. You teach them that your self-respect has a price. And they will keep looking for the currency that buys your surrender. Holding the line, even in the face of emotional backlash, is what tells them, and more importantly, tells you, that your well-being is not up for discussion. Many people hesitate to set boundaries because they fear being alone. But the space that opens when you enforce a boundary is not emptiness, it is clarity. It is room to breathe, to feel, to remember who you are outside the distortions of manipulation. That space may feel unfamiliar at first, especially if you have spent much of your life in reactive relationships, but it is the very place where healing begins. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are gates that decide what energy comes in and out of your life. You have every right to be selective. You have every right to protect your inner world with the same intensity that you protect your physical space. You must begin to feel safe with your own firmness, to recognize that you are not responsible for other people's feelings about your limits. You are only responsible for honoring the truth that rises within you when a line is crossed. This requires courage, but not aggression. It requires clarity, but not cruelty. It is the quiet knowing that you are no longer available for dynamics that drain you, disrespect you, or confuse you. The manipulator may call you cold, distant, or hard, but what you are becoming is untouchable in the most sacred sense, not as a defense mechanism, but as a result of finally seeing your emotional energy as a sacred resource that must be guarded with deep and unwavering reverence. There is a part of you that you were taught to hide, a voice within that says no without explanation, that recognizes manipulation without needing proof, that refuses to play the roles others project onto you. This part of you is often buried beneath layers of social conditioning, guilt, and the need to be accepted. But it is also the most powerful source of protection. You have the shadow self, the aspect of your being that carries the truth you are told not to speak. Emotional manipulators depend on your disconnection from this part of yourself. They thrive in the spaces where your power has been suppressed in the name of politeness, empathy, or spiritual humility. They exploit the idea that to be good is to be endlessly forgiving, to be kind is to be endlessly available, and to be strong is to never make others uncomfortable. But this is a lie woven deep into the fabric of emotional submission. Reclaiming your shadow is not about becoming hard or unkind. It is about becoming whole. To integrate your shadow means to recognize the qualities within you that you have disowned because they made others uncomfortable. It means embracing your capacity to say no without guilt, to walk away without explanation, to assert your needs without apology. When you begin to embody this unapologetic clarity, manipulators lose the ability to guilt you into compliance. They can no longer shame you for prioritizing your own well-being. They can no longer twist your compassion into a weapon against yourself. The integrated person is no longer at war within. They do not feel torn between who they are and who they were told to be. This internal unity is what gives rise to unshakable boundaries, clear perception, and emotional sovereignty. The manipulator cannot survive in this environment because they rely on fragmentation. They need you to doubt yourself, to split yourself into the pleasing self and the hidden self, the public self and the real self. Integration collapses this duality and makes you whole again. There will always be people who are threatened by your wholeness, by your refusal to be manipulated, by your ability to see through the games they play. They may try to frame your empowerment as arrogance, your distance as cruelty, your independence as abandonment, but these projections are not your responsibility. They are the echoes of a system that only functions when you remain disconnected from your power. The more you reclaim the parts of yourself that were once silenced, the more immune you become to the emotional tactics designed to keep you small. You begin to recognize that not every conflict needs your engagement, not every wound needs your healing, not every person deserves your energy. You begin to understand that silence can be power, that walking away is sometimes the loudest truth you can speak, that your presence is a gift, not a given. To reclaim your shadow is also to reclaim your instincts. Manipulators often succeed because they train you to distrust your gut. They reframe your clarity as paranoia, your boundaries as coldness, your discomfort as irrational. Over time, you start questioning what once felt certain. You begin to betray your body's wisdom in order to keep the peace, but the shadow holds the primal intelligence that was buried beneath layers of self-doubt. It knows when something is wrong even when there's no evidence. It knows when someone's energy doesn't match their words. It knows when you are being pulled into a dynamic that will leave you drained and confused. Relearning to trust this instinct is not about becoming reactive. It is about becoming responsive to the deep truth of your own experience. This reclamation is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet and steady. It does not require you to confront every manipulator, prove every point, or win every argument. It simply requires that you no longer abandon yourself to make someone else comfortable. When you move from this place, you are not resisting manipulation. You are rising beyond it. You are no longer someone who can be played like a role in someone else's drama. You are the author of your own reality, grounded in a truth that does not seek permission, explanation, or external validation. Manipulators thrive in environments where emotion overrides clarity, where urgency replaces stillness, and where reaction is mistaken for connection. They do not need to overpower you directly if they can simply provoke you to betray yourself. The art of manipulation depends heavily on your inability to pause, to reflect, to observe without being consumed. When you are constantly reacting, you are not thinking, you are surviving, and survival mode is the ideal terrain for emotional control, because it bypasses the higher faculties of discernment and insight. The manipulator counts on your emotional reactivity, on your compulsion to fix, to explain, to argue, to chase closure. They create chaos not because they enjoy disorder for its own sake, but because confusion weakens your inner compass. The more disoriented you are, the easier it is for them to present themselves as the stable center of gravity. You crave this is why cultivating inner stillness is not a passive act. It is an act of radical self-possession. In stillness, you disengage from the energetic push and pull that keeps you entangled in the manipulator's design. You begin to see the difference between what is urgent and what is important, between what is emotionally loud and what is quietly true. Stillness allows the dust to settle so that the path becomes visible again. It gives your nervous system room to breathe, to step out of the fight or flight dynamic that manipulation depends on. When you are still, you are no longer a puppet responding to every emotional tug. You become a grounded presence that chooses its responses rather than reacting on command. Inner watchfulness is what allows you to detect the subtle shifts that precede emotional traps. You begin to notice how a conversation that starts with concern ends in guilt, how a moment of connection is quickly followed by withdrawal, how praise is used as a leash rather than a gift. These patterns are easy to miss when you're caught in them, but from a place of stillness they become unmistakably clear. You no longer interpret manipulation as complexity. You see it as a strategy. You no longer confuse emotional volatility with depth. You see it as control. This shift in perception is not intellectual alone. It is embodied. It comes from having spent time observing your own emotional states, your triggers, your needs for validation, your discomfort with silence. It comes from turning your attention inward long enough to understand how you are moved and why to be still is not to be numb or indifferent. It is to be anchored in a truth that is not dictated by other people's expectations or manipulations. It is to sit with discomfort long enough that you no longer fear it, to allow emotions to rise and fall without having to act on them immediately. This is the space where your true self reemerges, not the self that performs to maintain relationships, not the self that bends under pressure to avoid conflict, but the self that sees clearly and moves intentionally. When you are watchful in this way, you are not detached from life. You are deeply engaged with it, but from a center that does not shift with every emotional current. Manipulators will often escalate their tactics when stillness is introduced. They will attempt to provoke you, to pull you back into the emotional arena where they feel in control. They may accuse you of being distant, unfeeling, or uncaring, but this reaction is only a sign that their usual tools are no longer working. Do not interpret it as failure, see it as confirmation. You are breaking the pattern not by fighting it, but by refusing to be moved by it. Your stillness is not a wall, it is a filter. It allows truth to pass through and distortion to fall away. It is the natural result of having reclaimed your inner space as sacred ground that cannot be accessed through manipulation, emotional theatrics, or guilt. This watchfulness, this conscious calm, becomes your shield, not because it hardens you, but because it connects you so deeply to yourself that nothing false can enter without being seen for what it is. There comes a moment in every awakening when you realize that the cost of silence is far greater than the discomfort of speaking your truth. Emotional manipulators thrive in the shadows of your hesitation, in the pauses where you second guess yourself, in the spaces where you weigh peace against authenticity and choose silence to avoid conflict. But peace built on the suppression of truth is not peace at all. It is a slow suffocation of the soul. Manipulators do not need to convince you of their version of reality if they can simply keep you quiet long enough to make you forget your own. They rely on your fear of rejection, your need for harmony, your instinct to maintain connection at the expense of clarity. And so the most revolutionary act you can commit is to tell the truth, not just to others, but to yourself. To speak what you feel, what you see, what you know without shrinking it to fit someone else's comfort or expectations' truth. Telling is not about confrontation or accusation. It is about alignment. It is the act of choosing to no longer distort your voice to fit someone else's story. It is the decision to value your perception even when it is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or misunderstood. Manipulators will often respond to this shift with confusion or rage because your truth breaks the spell. It disrupts the narrative they have worked so hard to maintain, the illusion where they are always right, always hurt, always justified. But your role is not to maintain anyone's illusion. Your role is to live in alignment with what is real for you. This requires courage, especially if you have been trained to equate love with silence or loyalty with self-abandonment. It requires unlearning the belief that truth causes harm, when in reality it is the absence of truth that creates the deepest wounds. When you begin to speak honestly, you will be tested. Not everyone will celebrate your clarity. Some will call you difficult, dramatic, disloyal, or cold. These labels are not reflections of your character. They are projections from those who benefited from your silence. Do not let them distract you. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. You are not here to manage the reactions of people who are unwilling to face themselves. You are here to live without carrying the weight of unsaid things, without playing roles you never agreed to, without dressing your pain in politeness. The more you speak, the more you realize that truth is not a weapon but a light. It does not harm, it reveals. It brings into focus what was hidden, distorted, or denied. And yes, some relationships will not survive that light. But those are the very relationships that depended on your silence to exist in the first place. Choosing truth over approval means accepting that you will not always be liked, understood, or accepted. But it also means that you will no longer be living on borrowed identities. You will no longer be sacrificing your mental and emotional clarity for the temporary comfort of others. Approval fades, opinions change, but your integrity remains. It becomes your anchor in the chaos, your compass in the fog. It allows you to stand in the midst of manipulation without being moved by it. You begin to see clearly not only what others are doing, but why you once tolerated it. And from that awareness comes freedom, not the freedom to escape conflict, but the freedom to face it without losing yourself in it every time you choose to speak the truth. Even when your voice shakes, you reclaim a piece of yourself that was lost in the silence. You affirm that your reality matters, that your perception is valid, that your boundaries are worth protecting. This is not arrogance. It is psychological integrity. It is the refusal to live in fragments. It is the return to wholeness, and in that return, manipulation can no longer find a place to root itself because the soil of your silence has been replaced with the strength of your voice, and no one can distort a story that is no longer hidden. You are not here to be controlled. You are not here to be conditioned. You are here to wake up and to walk in the light of your own mind. Emotional manipulators fear one thing above all: the awakened individual, one who sees through illusion, honors their truth, and walks away when necessary. So return to yourself. That is where your power lies, not in the noise, not in the approval, not in the roles you were told to play. Your liberation begins the moment you realize you were never meant to be someone else's puppet. You were born to be your own soul's guardian.